we play a game.
One way that video game violence is actually very different from other types of media violence has to do with how users interact with the technology. I think there are two important ways that video game violence is distinct. One is the level of activity involved, in fact, to the point of interactivity. Obviously, players interact with the technology so that their motions, their movements control the characters that they are playing, meaning they're very involved with what's going on. They're very sort of into the actions. They can get upset, they can yell, they can scream.
Who's your daddy? Who is your daddy?
You know, what's really exciting about video games is you don't just interact with the game physically. You're not just moving your hand on a joystick. But you're asked to interact with the game psychologically and emotionally as well. You're not just watching the characters on the screen, you're becoming those characters.
It really gives everyone a chance to sort of extend their relationship with these characters. After you see the film, you can actually become Tarzan.
It's actually the game based on the pod race that's in the movie, and Anakin Skywalker's voice is in the game. So as you're racing with his pod, you actually are him, just like in the movie.
One of the ways in which video games engage players as participants emotionally and psychologically is through realism and a heightened sense of realism. You could say that realism is the holy grail of the video game industry.
The key to Sega Dreamcast is the realism. The fact that in a football game, if it starts to rain, the crowd will put on ponchos. In a basketball game, all the faces of the players are actually modeled after the real players.
So, for example, we see a new level of realism in video sports games where they use live motion capture to capture the movements of real players. And this is important because in order for a video sports games to be popular, it has to give the player of the game a sense that they're really on the court, that they're really on the field, and also give them a sense that they're actually playing their favorite sports hero. This use of live motion capture and 3D modeling, we just don't see it in sports games. We see it in a lot of other video games as well. So, for example, Mortal Kombat has traditionally used live motion capture in each release of its game. The industry is hooked onto something. Realistic games sell. They're seductive. So we should expect to see increased use of technologies of realism in video games. And we should expect that the experience of playing video games will also become more and more realistic.
The use of realistic graphics and realistic animation is a sort of a bragging rights of sorts for industry organizations so that they can say our game is most realistic.
And then by Christmas we'll have 30 new games for the system that are so real you won't be able to tell if you're watching a movie or actually playing a game.
We've come a long way since Pong, where there were just sort of rectangular shapes and a bouncing ball. Now we have whole worlds and very realistic three-dimensional types of approaches to violence.
Rainbow Six, so true to life, even the experts can't tell the difference.
It's very easy for people to say, well, come on, what you see in a video game, you know that's not real. Kids know it's not real, or what goes on in a cartoon. Whether it's a roadrunner or some superhero saving the universe, people in the industry and people who want to defend this will say, this is just make-believe, it's just healthy, it's fun, nobody takes it seriously, nobody believes it. Well, it's not as if we walk around with a little switch in our heads that we can turn off and say fiction, reality, fiction, reality. Over time, the distinction between these two things is completely irrelevant. When it comes to media images, it's all representations. It's all manufactured, mediated imagery. It all goes into the constant, nonstop stream of experiences that we store up about the world around us.
When we look at the large amount of money spent, the amount of time kids play them, and the incredible level of realism they've been able to reach, realism that movies and TV can't even come close to competing with, it's important for us to understand this new technology. And although the question of violence is extremely important, we shouldn't let that limit how we understand video games. Because the stories of violence are always told in conjunction with other stories about gender, sexuality, and race. So we have to understand how all these things work together.